Hello friends, it's Freddie here from eBassGuitar, and on today's episode of Real World Bass Heroes we have none other than James Eager. Today's topic, how did we get here and where are we going? Hello friends, it's Freddie here from eBassGuitar, and we have a very special guest on Real World Bass Heroes today over at eBassGuitar. We have the one and only James Eager, the guy who usually asks you the questions is going to get asked the questions by me today. So, James, I have 5 questions for you.
Go on.
The first question that I'm going to ask you is, what got you into playing the bass guitar?
Well, I need to start off and rewind a little bit and go back to when I was 7 years old, and I've got something which might surprise you all. For the first 2 years of my musical career, can you believe it? I was a drummer. Oh my God. And how did that all happen? My dad was actually a drummer, my father. And I don't talk about this too often, but it comes out every now and again. My dad in about 1967 was a drummer for a little known guy called David Bowie. He did the album before Space Oddity. So if you look up a guy called Johnny Eager on there, here's your man. He did this. The classic track, The Laughing Gnome. And when I was growing up, probably about every 6 months to a year, some David Bowie sort of audiophile, kind of, I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah, no, that's the correct term.
Is it, anyway, anorak, shall we say, would come round and talk David Bowie. And so I was always surrounded by this kind of world of like rock music. And at that point, there was a drum kit in the house, and so I started thrashing around on the drum kit. And then there was another pivotal moment shortly after that where my parents bought me the Genesis VHS at the time of the Mama Tour, and I watched Phil Collins behind that drum kit absolutely obsessively. I must have worn that VHS out. I'm going to dig it out when it's going up on that shelf. I've still got it to this very day. And that was really what sort of solidified my love of music. But then something happened. About aged 10 years old, humorously say, I graduated to become a musician. Well, half a musician, we're all bass players, aren't we?
People who hang out with the band, right?
Yeah, indeed. And so I was walking around 2 or 3 days after Christmas in a local music shop, and I saw this red Encore Fender Stratocaster copy in the shop. And I pestered my dad for days and said, can you get that for me? He eventually gave in, and I took that guitar home with some kind of, I don't know, Rock Tech practice amp, I think it was. And that was when I fell in love with playing the guitar. And at that point, I got obsessed with 2 guitarists at that point. The first one was Nuno Bettencourt from Extreme.
Oh, amazing. What a player. That solo on Hip Today.
You got it. And then the second guy I got absolutely obsessed with was Gary Moore.
Yeah.
Still got the blues album.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a classic.
I know. And all I wanted to be was that lead guitarist out the front there, foot up on the monitor, like doing that thing. And I did that for a period of probably 6 years after that. But there was this shift going on that the bass guitar started coming into play. Mm-hmm. Now let me talk about how that one happened. So I went to school, I was in a fairly kind of traditional kind of school at that time. And my parents thought, well, he needs to learn a proper instrument. And at that point, they went, the double bass would be really good for you. I think my dad spotted, because he's kind of a canny kind of guy, that there weren't that many bass players around.
Sure.
And so at that point, I started taking classical double bass lessons. So there I was playing classical Arco bowing double bass at school. And then on the side, without any teachers really knowing, well, they knew, but it wasn't really the done thing. I was playing, learning those extreme solos, the Gary Moore solos. I think I was also having some classical guitar lessons at the time.
Did your Nuno Bettencourt, Gary Moore solos ever translate onto the double bass? Were you shredding up at the dusty end at any point, or?
No, that never quite happened in my career.
Right.
But I love the idea that you're talking about. It would work. Anyway, it was just one of those things that, as a natural fusion of the electric guitar and the double bass lessons I was having, the bass guitar happened.
Naturally.
And then before you know it, there are no bass players around, and the school jazz band needed a bass player. And so I was the guy which did that. But really, for many years, I wanted to be playing the guitar in a jazz band. But believe it or not, I had to play bass. And so for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years, I was kind of mostly guitarist with a bit of bass on the side. And then this shift started happening when I was about 16 years old. There is a great institution in the UK called the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, NYJO they called it for short, which many of our great British UK musicians come out of, go through. And I remember going and playing the bass guitar with them one Saturday afternoon and playing with my first decent, really good drummer. Great guy, Matt Madonna, we're still in touch today. He's a top player. And I remember playing with him and just, I felt like this is the groove. This is it. And then there was this gradual shift over the next couple of years where I got less interested in
Foot on the monitor.
Foot on the monitor, more interested in just sitting in the back going. That kind of thing. And I then started becoming a bass player. And I got to 18 years old and it's like, well, what do I do next with my life? And I managed to score a place at Trinity College of Music in London, their first ever jazz degree. That's when I went into studying bass guitar and double bass full time. So that was my transition from drummer through to kind of where we are now.
Do you find that it was helpful to juggle all of those different instruments at once?
I think it's made me who I am today. I think I've always been interested in playing both basses because I'm still an upright player, double bass player. Yeah. We should have it sitting in the corner there, really. It's
over there.
It's over there, out of shot. But even throughout college, I was playing both the double bass and the electric bass, kind of 50-50 throughout the whole thing. Because I realised I just love bass playing. I love music. I wasn't pinned down to one genre, one era, anything like that. It was just all about great bass playing. And so still to this day, I kind of juggle at least 2 instruments. And I think that's what's made me, thankfully, very highly employable for many years because I did both instruments. But I think, now you said it, that started off many, many years ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, while you were at college,
yep.
What was the hardest thing that they asked you to do? What was the thing that challenged you the most while you were in your process of still studying music? And what advice could you give to somebody who's maybe struggling with music education at the moment, if they are?
The whole of music college was really challenging for me. It was a challenging period of my life where I had to get my stuff together, shall we say. This is a family stuff. This is a family show. And it was all a period of getting it together. And so I remember it being a very challenging period that I pushed through. But the one thing for me, which I will, if I touch on one thing, is learning to read music.
Sure.
I did a lot by ear in the early days, a lot by feel, and I'm fairly open and honest about this, certainly to my eBassGuitar subscribers, that I'm dyslexic. I was diagnosed when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I believe that made it really hard for me to learn how to read music. But I pushed through. Twice a week at college, we had big band rehearsals, so I was reading dots every week, just to make sure, just to really learn that skill. And there were points, I can remember conversation with one of the guys, big band leaders, just like, am I ever going to get this together? I was getting lost in parts, just things, it made no sense to me. And I was around all these people which could academically read music really well. I couldn't. But I pushed through, and if I was to give one piece of advice to anybody, it's just keep going. It will come together. However much you're in the beginning and going, this isn't going to happen, it will happen. And just 2 days before filming this video, I did a gig that was just all pure sight reading, using that muscle that I sharpened all those years back. So yeah, learn to read.
Absolutely. We were talking about this just before we started filming. What was the groove that you mentioned that you were struggling with? We were discussing saying, oh, it's quavers in a 2-feel, why is it throwing me? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. Over the weekend, I did the show, and a lot of it was for musical theatre at school. We had to play the theme from Annie, the hard knock. It's a hard knock, bump, gum, gum. And it's one of those things, on that page, there were literally crotchets and quavers. That was all it was. Or if we're to American folks, quarter notes, eighths notes.
Yeah.
But you always have to get inside a piece of music. And sometimes the simplest things can be the hardest things to read until you understand how they worked. And when I clocked, hold on, rather than feeling a fast 4, we need to be feeling this as a 2 feel. And also just think of all of those 8th notes as 16th notes in relation to the pulse that I was doing 2 in a bar. It just all came together. And that's just one of those little bits of experience that you get from having done this time and time again.
So improvisation is quite a large part of contemporary bass playing, and particularly having had a jazz background, done a jazz degree, playing jazz double bass and jazz electric bass. Was there a moment with your soloing where you felt that you'd sort of broken through in confidence? Because speaking from personal experience, soloing is probably the thing that I personally find hardest. And I still feel I'm searching for that eureka moment because I never did jazz. So I'm wondering, is that something that you've encountered with your own solo playing?
First of all, I don't really consider myself a soloist.
Okay.
I can take a solo and do something competent, passable, that fits in the situation. But my real love to that is actually just playing bass grooves.
Sure.
I love doing what a bass player expects you to do. That's my not guilty pleasure, it's just my pleasure of playing this instrument. Feeling that pulse, I mean, I think it's just a real tribal kind of internal thing.
I know what you mean.
And when I'm connected with that, and it goes back to that time I played with a great drummer at the beginning, that feeling is something that I try and recreate all of the time. I can solo, but it's not done under duress per se, but it's not something that I pride myself on. And if you see what I work on when I practice the bass these days, it's all much more groove related. They're the bass players that I transcribe. I have huge respect for any of those guys which can do the crazy stuff, but that's not me. I became very clear on that a number of years, probably 3 or 4 years after I left college, when I sussed out what I really loved in music. Sure. And that's just being connected to that groove. And really, that's what I went on to teach when I started eBassGuitar, was like, how do we just play grooves really well? How do we play our favorite songs? How do we do exactly what a bass player expects, or what's expected of a bass player?
Absolutely brilliant answer. So number 4, if you could travel back in time and watch a significant bass player moment of history, what would it be and why?
This might sound quite predictable. It would be Jaco Pastorius. Now, the reason I say this is because my dad, after he had his stint of being a rock star, which I say jokingly, but after he did that, he got into jazz fusion, and Weather Report came along. He got in there, and he tells this story, I kid you not, of what a different time we're in. He heard Chick Corea's Leprechaun on the radio. And on the radio, in the car, he phoned up the BBC to go, what on earth was that? And it turned out it was the incredible Steve Gadd on drums, that kind of stuff. And that just shows how freely accessible music is now. Anyway, he was big into Weather Report, and Jaco Pastorius was happening at that moment in time. And he always recounts, I can't remember the exact year, let's say hypothetically 1978, be about the right time. He saw Weather Report at the Hammersmith Apollo, or he always calls it by its original name, which I can't remember what it
Hammersmith
is.
Odeon.
The Hammersmith Odeon.
I call it that too because of the Bruce Springsteen DVD.
Yeah, the Hammersmith Odeon. He saw it at the Hammersmith Odeon. He just talks about how it was just jazz, and it said it was like 1,000,000 megawatts. It was so loud, and it just said it was the most amazing thing. Then he also tells the story, and it shows how influential our parents are in this situation, that he took my grandfather with him, who was kind of a stride piano player. I think he was professional as well.
Right.
In the 1930s, doing that, but from another era of jazz and music and that kind of thing. And during this Weather Report concert, he fell asleep. I know, it was brilliant. And so I've heard this story countless times, and it just makes me go, how I would have loved to have been there. Now, the second concert I would have loved to, God, actually, we're going in, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 more.
Significantly influential bass player moments was the question.
Oh,
so it can be a concert.
Okay, it would have been one of those concerts from there if it was a bass player moment. But I would have loved to have seen that Genesis Mama Tour from 1984, because I watched it so many times on DVD.
Sure.
The next one, I would have loved to have been at Nebworth 90.
Yeah.
So I watched that obsessively on VHS, recorded on the TV. All those stars like Clapton, McCartney, Elton John, all those brilliant stars. And then the last one that I would have loved to have been at was Pink Floyd, the Division Bell Tour in 1994.
Division Bell, interesting choice. Controversial couple of albums amongst Floyd fans.
Oh, absolutely, but I'm always populist. I realise my taste in Genesis is controversial amongst the people from the early days.
Of course. Well, yeah, Guy Pratt and Roger Waters bring such different characters to the Floyd. But yeah, tell me about Division Bell.
Again, I fell in love with big scale rock and roll shows. I loved rock and roll from those artists, those great British artists. In terms of production, big music, lights, sound, etc., etc. For me, that show is the pinnacle of that at that moment in the time.
Sure.
So that's why I would love to be there. Again, I watched it obsessively on VHS.
Fantastic. Okay, final question. Your desert island bass, what would you take if you could only take one instrument and you were stuck on a desert island?
I would take this bass here.
Yeah, this one?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you why. This Sadowski bass came into my life 10 years ago, maybe 11 now. And from a guy that at one point in his career had probably 10 to 12 basses racked up and was constantly searching for the sound, I hit this bass and I've just stuck with it ever since. I don't know, it feels like home, and that is it. And I went to one of our great bass stores in the UK a couple of weeks ago and played loads of wonderful, wonderful instruments, but I still picked this up the next day on the gig and went, this is the bass that I would take with me. It just feels good.
Fantastic. So in theory, your dream gig is playing that bass with your drummer friend from when you were 16, playing at the Genesis concert, with it being recorded to VHS.
Absolutely VHS. Betamax, I'm not fussy.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, well that's 5 questions with James from eBassGuitar. If you have any other questions you'd like to ask him, please write them in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on anything that you want to know from James. And one more thing before you go, everybody. Head over to eBassGuitar.com. You can check out the Bass Lab Plus, which
you can work with me and the rest of the team over there. We have over 350 step-by-step lessons waiting for you. And of course,
we have the VIP section where you can get in contact with me if you're interested in lessons or any of our other eBassGuitar faculty. See you soon.
Cheers. Catch you next time, guys.